Welcome to another episode of Self Care Saturday with ND Jones. Today, I have the honor and pleasure of having two amazing men here with me today. And I always love having males. It's always much more, it's so easy to get a lot of females. And I think it's simply because I know a lot of Black women. So it's always rewarding when I'm able to touch base and check in with Black men because that's a different side of the equation that we don't always get to hear. And that even if you have a Black man as a friend, lover, relative, we can't write for them, we can't speak for them. So it's important for allow them to have a venue in which they can speak and define themselves. And in doing so, I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And then, as always, we're just going to jump straight in. So we're going to begin with Stanley Jenkins. Introduce yourself and
Okay, hi. How's everybody doing? My name is Stanley Jenkins. In the interest of full disclosure, I am the husband of the great ND Jones. So, in this full disclosure, I'm also the Community Engagement Research Fellow with the Center for the Study of Religion and a prospective doctoral student. And I think that's pretty much it on my end.
that is so not it. Talk a little bit about your background so they can, so the artists can have a bit of a frame of reference for where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, in terms of a background, one of the things I guess I'll start with interest just for me. One of the things I really enjoy doing, and I guess I don't know if it's nerdy or what, but I just like thinking. I enjoy listening to people. I enjoy listening to others' experiences. I have a pretty keen sense when it comes to just being curious. I distinguish that from being nosy, but I am curious about all kinds of things, particularly just about being a human being, just me, just being in the world, trying to live, trying to do the right thing, trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good person. So I like thinking. I love, since this is the topic and I don't want to jump ahead, I love internal martial disciplines like Tai Chi Chuan, meditation, the internal martial arts, Lue Bafa, and many other disciplines that have this integration of mind, body, and depending on the way you define it, spirit. So I've been a practitioner of those disciplines for a long time, and I don't know where I would be. I don't know what I would do if I couldn't engage in those disciplines. Uh, so the usual haunts, reading history, watching movies. There's more I can say, but I know we have a time, and I want Brother FD to definitely get his fill.
Thank you for that introduction. And we just let the audience know that Stanley's written an essay on resilience in the Men's Journal, and in which he talks about a particular harrowing health scare, more than that, actually that he had, but that defines a portion of his story as well. So when you have an opportunity to take a look at the journal, read his story entitled Unearned Suffering. And now we have FD, and I would just preface his introduction by saying that I was so happy. I listened to podcasts to and from work because I have an hour journey each way. And he popped up in my feed. And I'm like, wait, what? It's a brother talking about some real stuff. And actually, I think your first podcast that I listened to was on Issa Rae, and the way that Black African American men were depicted in her show. And that's something that my husband and I were late on the bandwagon, but he absolutely loves that show. I believe he enjoys it far more than I do. And I think perhaps for some of the same reasons you covered in that particular podcast. And so I said, hey, I came home one day, I said, I found this new guy. I think you need to watch him. I think that you will absolutely enjoy some of his discourse. And it's not always about agreeing, but just about having that conversation that's put out there. So when I thought about this, I thought about you. I thought it fit into your wheelhouse. And I thank you very much for agreeing to come on the channel and be with us today. So please share a bit about yourself.
Yes, so I go by FD Signifier is the YouTube channel. And I am uh, a little over a year into content creation. I'm sorry, by the way, as if you've watched many of the videos, you might know that I'm recording from my kitchen, and our dishwasher machine has been beeping since last night. So just be aware if you hear any beeps in the audio. As I said, I started YouTube last year. We talked a little bit before, kind of like you, where I suddenly had time on my hands and perspective on what was going on in the world, especially over the summer, and decided I wanted to just start making content. I've always been a creative at heart, but I've never really gave it a real effort up until this point. I've always been a pop culture junkie, and I have a background in all things social engagement, progressive movement, and just helping people action related activities, from mentorship to activism to working with sex workers, working with the homeless, and mostly education, directly engaging with youth. And so also in school myself, I'm also a doctoral candidate for sociology. And all of that culminated into me saying, how do I combine all these things with my YouTube persona and my minor background in media? And suddenly I had a YouTube channel. And so the Issa Rae video, ironically, was a video I made last year that when she got married, I tinkered with the thumbnail, and suddenly YouTube was like, hey, everybody watch this. And that's how you all saw it. That's how a lot of people saw it, because before then it had maybe like 400 views, and now it has almost 200,000.
Wow.
That's a whole other subject, is the game of
Right.
But my goal evolved into saying the energy around and with Black men, especially in social media, is just very destructive and self-destructive. And you can't be a self-destructive Black man in a vacuum. If you are a self-destructive man, somebody is going to catch collateral damage. And that's what I think has been going on for a long time with a lot of us. And having the visibility of it in the last couple of years has just been kind of heart-wrenching for me, as I've developed new ideas and understandings about health and wellness and mental health as a Black man. I've talked before, I have 2 Black sons that are very young, and I am thinking about how to raise and teach them differently than what I was taught, not just in the classic sense of, hey, value education, stay off the street, whatever, because I did that. That wasn't hard for me. But in, take care of yourself, be emotionally whole, learn to process negative emotions, respect Black women, respect your own body, things like that. And so that's where a lot of the channel's energy is focused, and along with just general pop culture using stuff. And yeah, so like, when I read that this is what you all were doing, I got a lot of people suddenly in my email. Not all of them got responses, but I also didn't really know how to manage things. But I'm happy we were able to connect, because the concepts and the thing that you seem to be working on and focused on is definitely an area that I want to also contribute to. So I'm happy to be here.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I think your introduction really is a nice segue into my first question. And I'll pose it to you first, FD, since Stan did the introduction first. And again, like I said, we'll go back and forth. So what does it mean for you to be a Black man in the 21st century?
Starting off with the easy one. What does it mean practically? I'm not a very abstract, I'm a pragmatist at heart. So practically, it just means survival. It just means, how do I survive and take care of myself, my family, my loved ones, in an environment that is inherently toxic to myself, my family, my loved ones. And what does that require? Theoretically, it means, so we have the pragmatic, just like whatever can do those things, do that. Theoretically, it means whole health. It means improving communication and emotional wellness on my end, instilling that in my son so that it's second nature to them, as opposed to a detoxifying process that it is for a lot of men. Protecting them in that, managing that, because although I'm lucky enough that I'm able to kind of surround my children with mostly positive energy in that regard, I also know that at some point in time, they're going to meet with a society that does not approve of Black men and boys who are emotionally whole. And so in that regard, trying to create change and be and engage in thought leadership in the sphere that I can access. And very importantly, expressing a doctrine of equity and respect to Black women, to other marginalized people, to sexual minorities, to all of those whom Black men's whims affect, whom are capable of being hurt by our actions, and especially the actions that we take out of our own hurt, So all of those things is my best answer.
All right. Wow. Okay. And what about you? What does it mean to be a Black man in the 21st century?
Although I knew about this question, I have to say that it is something that, as crazy as it may sound, I'm still thinking about. I haven't completely come to a conclusion on what that means. So if I ramble, please stop me. But I guess what immediately came to mind, which is similar to what FD was saying, I think, is struggle. That term kind of comes to the fore, particularly when I think about my own life. But at the same time, I think that it's a strange mix of joy and pain, of progress and setback, of anger and hope. I think in some way, shape, or form, maybe these are just human emotions or experiences, but I think in some way, shape, or form, when I think about my life and I think about the collective experience as best I can from my own perspective, that's the first thing that comes to mind is struggle and this strange paradoxical mix of feelings and emotions and moods, where as a brother, you want to fight and you want to, as a man, having a family, you want the best that is there for your family. You want to do the best for them and you try your best. And so, like my son, Sufa, Naja, my daughter, you believe in ideas of hard work and that if you work hard, you'll succeed. And you instill this idea of hope. Hope is sort of this future-oriented idea and you're working hard for them. But then you have your George Floyd phenomenon. You have the notion of white supremacy. And having a daughter, you have the idea of misogyny and sexism, not just in the white community, but in the Black community. So I want to be truthful as a brother when you have children, but at the same time, you have to put forward an idea of hope, even if you don't always concur with it in the way that it's put out. You still have to put something out there. You have to instill them with something. And so for me, when I think about struggle, it's not just the struggle to live and survive and raise a healthy, positive family. It's a struggle with trying to really understand these ideas and these concepts that, I think sometimes we bandy about and we kind of throw them out there, oh man, it's always has this romanticized tenor to it, being a woman is, you're strong. And well, sometimes, being a man is being vulnerable. Being a man is having to own up to what you did wrong. And I don't know, as a Black man, I guess suffice it to say, I would say struggle, because I don't want to keep going on. And I would just say this strange, like, mix of contradictions that you live with and you try to work out along the way. You work it out pragmatically because you know you got to live, you got to eat. And you try to work it out intellectually, not necessarily in any abstract sense, but understanding that language matters. Understanding all of that matters, and it helps to direct your path. So that was a very, very good question. I'd agree with FD. You start out with the easy questions first.
Well, let me ask this question, because typically, and I'm going to ask you guys a couple of different questions from the ones that we had on the list, just to shake it up a little bit. One, because you guys can just handle it, so I already know. But just so the audience can get a little bit of a different take. So I typically ask what words, images, or people come to mind when you think of the word resilience. But I'm not going to ask you that. I'm going to ask something very similar to it, though. Especially since you guys both spoke about being a father. So what does resilience, and I start with you, Stan, feel like, sound like, and or look like? So you think about resilience. So maybe what does it feel like, sound like, or look like? Those are three different questions. You don't have to tackle all three. I'm looking at FD. I think he's found that as a challenge, because he's definitely going to look at all three. But you can pick one, or you can pick two, or you can really do three. But really, what does it sound, look, or feel like to be resilient?
I think if I were just to come off the top of my head, which we are, since this is not right, it reminds me of a passage I saw written somewhere where it says, "Speak truth even when your voice trembles." And I think, man, that's a really good question. Feel like, I think it feels like, I think you have to have some kind of relationship with being uncomfortable. I think if you're a Black man in this society, it is incumbent upon you to, even if you don't want to stand in a certain way. Even standing up for yourself is going to be an exercise in being uncomfortable, because you standing up as a Black man is going to make certain folks, because of the history and the continued legacy of white supremacy, they're not going to be comfortable, and they're going to seek to make you uncomfortable, that you don't know what you think. You don't know, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. There's always this struggle, this fight. So for me personally, I think that one of the things it feels like is it's going to be uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable, being uncertain, and being unsure is not necessarily a bad thing. I think we get too comfortable. You know, that's one of the things I like about the martial arts. There is a period, and there is also, I guess, a certain constant, but you're not always comfortable. These stances and movements are not natural to you, but you have to develop through consistency and practice and resilience, perseverance. You have to develop a certain stability and understanding that once you master some of these moves, oh, there's a glory at the end of that. There's some beauty at the end of that. But you have to go through this mortification of the flesh. You have to sort of go through that period and understand that that is a part of the human condition. That is a part of growth. That it's been said human development is involuntary, but growth is a choice. And growth does involve some discomfort and pain. Now, what does that sound like? Sometimes you're going to be uncertain. You're going to be wrong. And you have to sort of understand that there is a process to growth, and that is perpetual. And that it doesn't mean that you just feel good about being wrong, but that there's a process, and that if you understand the process and you're willing to take that path and tread that path, you're going to learn some things and you're going to grow from it. And there are going to be people who see strength in you that you don't see. So you become sort of, I guess, a wounded healer, as some Black Buddhists would say, or you become a person with baggage, but at the same time, you have this strength. You see the baggage, others may see the strength, you see. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I mean, as I was thinking, I know FD is really in the cinema because I love movies, right? The image from Baby Boy, I know you didn't say images, right? Which was the prayer scene where Cuba Gooding Jr.'s brother, he said this prayer he had when he had Tyrese with him, and they said a prayer. And it went something like, we try, Lord. You know we imperfect. You know we don't have all the answers, but we try to keep our heads up in bad times. And these are bad times. So show us the way. And if you can't show us the way, then please forgive us for not knowing the way. For me, that desire to know, and even in the face of whatever maladies and issues you have, I got to keep moving forward. I got to keep on this. I got to keep learning. It's uncomfortable, but I got to keep going and knowing that, yeah, I'm growing, but lack of comfort is going to be there.
Definitely. Excellent. And you definitely added to the question when I asked about words, images, or people. And I'm not gonna interject my thought in this. I really want to hear what FD has to say as well about what does resilience feel like, sound like, and or look like.
It's hard to follow that right there. So I am big on this concept of wholeness, especially with Black men. And I feel like that courage of seeking that is where a lot of my image of resilience comes from, because in seeking wholeness as a Black man, you are transgressing against the dominant society's desire for what you are supposed to be and what roles you're supposed to enact in society. And when you are transgressing as a Black man, that can be a very lonely experience, because others, men, women, whomever, will see you in that space transgressively and say, you stay over there. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're on. And I'm not going to deal with that. And you have to be resilient enough to be comfortable in that space until you can make it big enough to include others in it. Mm-hmm. And that looks like men who are being courageous enough to speak on their needs to their peers and partners without fearing how that makes them look. That sounds like words of encouragement and words of love. It looks like intimacy between Black men that is not sexualized. I made a comment in one video how a Black man can't put a picture on social media hugging his son or another Black man without people sexualizing it, because that's transgressive. Black men's physical bodies are for violence and sex, or maybe sports. You know what I'm saying? And so when you just want to show another man you love him with a hug, or you want to kiss your son, that's difficult for people to engage with. And so in all of those things, you have to, as a man, as a person in general, be resilient against the social scripts that people want to impose upon you, because you are now walking a path where you're like, this is what's better for me. This is what's better for my family. And I want to set an example. I want to show other men, other people, that this is just as true. Because I've been criticized as being against classical images of masculinity. And that's not my intention. I am very classically masculine in real life. That's just, I'm a older, compared to the YouTube space, I'm very old. YouTube skews very young. Most of my peers are in their early 20s. So like, I'm a product of that world, and I want to show that as a product of that world, my understanding and practice of masculinity is just as valid as some of my homeboys who are more conservative, some of my homeboys who are more progressive, that we can all contribute to functional and healthy images and practices of manhood that are not based on dominance and degradation of both ourselves and the people around us. So I hope that answers the question.
No, you did. Both of you did. Listen, and people always say they hope the answer that comes to your heart and mind and eventually out of your mouth, that's always the right answer because that's your truth. And I'll tell you what image came to mind when I was listening to you speak, and I was thinking about what Stan said. So today on Instagram, I saw an image and it was actually a drawing. And I thought it was a beautiful drawing. And it was three generations of Black males. So you had the grandfather, you had his son, and then you had the grandson. And what the artist did was they had the grandfather kissing the forehead of his son, and then between the grandfather and the father, there was the grandson, and then the father kissing the forehead of his young male child. And when I saw that, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. But I think it gets to part of that image of Black manhood. What does it really look like? What does it mean? How are we defining it within the community? How are Black men defining it themselves, but also how that outside community really defining Black manhood. And what that also brings me to, and you guys don't hate me for this, but I know you won't, but I'm just going to challenge you just a little bit as far as going off script. It's not off script because it's in my book, but it's off script in the sense that I simply did not warn you. But you guys are taking this path, so I'm going to open up this question for you. And I'm going to begin with you, FD. And I think it very much connects to the way you answered the previous question. So my question to you, to both of you is, I'm going to start from down here. What were you taught as a child, as perhaps a young man, about feelings and or emotions? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I have an entire piece in the book about emotions and the fact that part of our perseverance, or perhaps our struggle with perseverance, can perhaps be connected to our thoughts and feelings about emotions, how we were raised, and maybe how we currently think about it. So I want to have a little conversation about that, and I'll lead you through a series of questions. So I'll back up and repeat it again. What were you taught about feelings or emotions as a young man, or as a boy, actually?
With all love and respect to my family, not a lot as a man. I am grateful in that I didn't get the somewhat toxic version of Black boyhood. I got bits and pieces of it maybe, but that story of, the boy gets into a fight and comes home and the mama or daddy says, go on back outside and beat that person up. I never got that. You know what I'm saying? I understand where that comes from, but it's also not overly healthy in the long run. But I didn't get the full range of emotional discourse that I'm trying to give my children. And so thankfully I was a quieter, more like contemplative kid. So it never got into a situation where I felt like I was out of control of my emotions, because my emotions always ran relatively mild. But, there were plenty of times where I heard boys don't cry. There were plenty of times where I was expected to reduce an emotional response to a situation based on my gender, and that was always frustrating to me as a kid. I tell a story. I love my cousin to death. I probably told her story like 3-4 times now in different venues, but I hope she still loves me. I had a female cousin that used to beat the mess out of me. She was a bigger cousin. She was a year older than me, and would just hit me with all her might whenever we saw each other, and would hurt me, and I would cry because I was being hit. And I had pretty much every auntie would say, stop crying, she's a girl. And as a child, I just did not understand how that was a logical response to what was happening.
Right.
And it was very, I had the language internally to work through that. I was thankfully always kind of a sociologically inclined kid, but it still sucked. And it still did not lead to useful methodologies to understand my emotional development as going into manhood. And so like that was still, the baseline standard of what I think a lot of boys experience. I've said before, boys' emotions, Black boys especially, our emotions are weaponized against us by the time we can walk. Like as soon as you're walking and communicating, you are being taught to, disengage your emotional capacity and range as a boy, because that's what's expected. And so it's difficult to say what my emotional upbringing was, because I don't know if I had one in the grand scheme, and I think I'm not alone in that.
Yeah. What about you, Stan? What were you taught about feelings and emotions? And when I mean taught, I mean that in the way of indirectly modeling, as opposed to actually being explicitly told. So you picked up on both of those. Go ahead, Stan.
That's actually where I was going to go. But if I might, I think something I wanted to say in response to what FD was saying on the previous question, actually, I think factors in here, because that's an excellent question. And that is the idea of internal interrogation that I think he was talking about in terms of notions and understandings of masculinity, where some of us have internalized some ideas, and he seemed to have been just naturally had that natural ability to internally decipher and to interrogate his own ideas and attitudes or the situation itself and see some light at the end of the tunnel. That is what I'm still in the process of doing in reference to the question you posed, because there was some dysfunction in my upbringing. And some of that dysfunction involved violence that I saw modeled in the home. At the same time, and this is going to sound contradictory, and it is, I know and I knew then that they wanted the best for us. And that if they couldn't necessarily model the behavior because they didn't really know, they would point you in the direction that they wanted you to go. Do as I say and not as I do, sort of that. And there was a lot of love there, but there were a lot of things that I saw that were violent and troubling. And in terms of just the idea of touch, didn't do a lot of hugging with my dad, right? That wasn't something where he came up and he would just, but I knew, if someone touched me in the street, he was there. I knew that. And he would smile. There'd be various ways he would show you. He loved to talk and dialogue, but touch or saying, and I love you. That wasn't modeled. That wasn't said. It was sort of implicit. And so one of the things I wanted to do is that I had to then go inside as a growing young person, growing adult. And, university life and all that helped a great deal in understanding the impact in certain ways that your upbringing has on you. And that, you brought to the table too. You weren't the same, right? Mm-hmm. And so now that, you have children, right? You have to resolve yourself that I'm not going to do it that way. So I'm going to improve upon some of the good things that happened to me. And one of the things is being unafraid to tell your son, I love you. Say, come here, give me a hug. Give me a hug. You hug me. not a broham hug. You know, sometimes we broham hug and it's barely a hug, you barely touch them. No, where you embrace him and pull him to you, and it's okay for his body to touch yours. And it doesn't have anything to do with sexuality. This is intimacy. And so I know that I've had to work on that. And when I feel uncomfortable, I said, I'm going to do it. It's my son. Even with my daughter, come, give me a hug. Give me a hug. And really trying to make sure as best I can that I don't pass on that sort of social distance, that sort of unspoken emotion that you have. You know, it's something that even chokes me up now, but that was the experience, you know, being a wounded healer, having to go through life and struggle and say, hey, you know, being strong doesn't mean being the Marlboro man. It means that you're going to have these hurts and that you have to work through them. And it doesn't mean that you're broken. You can be whole working through those issues. You know, not being a human being, but being a human becoming and still having a being. That those two ideas can exist within the same space. It's not an either or dichotomy. That for me is what Ta-Nehisi Coates would call the beautiful struggle. It's a beautiful struggle, but it's still a struggle. So that's kind of the way I see that. I could say a lot more on that because I feel that that's something that, like, when you talk about modeling, it's like, man, yeah, that brings out a lot.
Wow. Yeah, you guys are amazing. And because, like, you're right there. You're literally inside the journal. You don't even realize how much you both are, because there's so many layers to the conversation that we're having surrounding emotions. And you alone, Stan, you probably covered like 2 or 3 of the other questions that I actually wanted to propose. No. Because it's not meant to be segmented. It all naturally blends together which is the reason why I wrote them the way I did. Once you pull back and start reflecting on how you were raised and the emotions and your thoughts and feelings, not so how you were raised, but how you were taught directly or indirectly about emotions, then you have to sit back and say, well, how do I currently feel about that? Which is really what I want to ask you. And not only how you currently feel, but so what lessons, what are you doing perhaps that's the same based on how you were raised and maybe why, or perhaps maybe what you're doing differently based on how you were raised and why. And I think you really started to get into that. You gave great examples. And I'm going to put a pin in that because you said so much that I think is already related to this question. So FD, I'm going to ask you guys both this because both of you mentioned being fathers, being a parent, and consciously thinking about what that truly means when you interact with your children. So if you want to frame your answer in that way, it's totally up to you, but it's not limited to fatherhood. So thinking about how you were raised, what do you now believe about feelings and emotions? And I guess connected to that is, what lessons have you learned? Now, those are totally different questions, and they're meaty questions. So address it how you
they
will.
connect, I think. So there's a concept, French sociologist Michel Foucault, who's I wrote about in my graduation studies. He has a concept called the panopticon. And I don't know if you're familiar, but if the audience, people in the audience may not be familiar, the panopticon is a jail where there's no walls. There's a prison on the inside of a larger structure. And the prisoners are just on platforms and there's no walls so that the prisoners can see the outside structure. And in the outside structure are the guards and the wardens. And so the prisoners know, and this is how real jails are designed, by the way, in real life. So the outside wardens are always looking in on the prisoner's behavior, and the prisoners are always aware that the wardens are looking in. And over time, the prisoners begin to police themselves because they know that whatever they do, somebody is watching. And so with that understanding internalized, they don't think, can I get away with this? They say, there's no way I can get away with this. Somebody's going to see this. So they begin to enact appropriate behavior based on that. And to me, that is a perfect description for how we police masculinity and how men learn to, this is something that Stanley touched on, we learn to internalize behaviors and ideologies about what we're supposed to do. And so the thing that I learned the most that I had to really pull out is I am not a prisoner. And that the people who are watching that may approve or may disapprove do not have actual power over me. I don't answer to them. I don't go home to them. I don't feed them. They don't feed me, so on and so forth. And so so it becomes more about how do I believe I should behave and how do I behave in a way that is best for me and my family. And I think you wanted to touch on like the fatherhood aspect. Did you mention that?
If you want to talk about fatherhood, I know you mentioned your sons and what you're trying to do with them.
Yeah, I'm trying to give them a head start on it. It's to, when my sons get emotional or get upset or get too hyperactive or get a little rowdy, you know what I'm saying? And talk about wanting to fight people and stuff like that. I try to respond to that in a vacuum, as opposed to this is not what little boys do, or this is little boys. Because that gives them more range in how they can learn to grow and develop their emotions and more opportunity to process negative emotions in the future. Because at some point in time, there's gonna be heartbreak. My oldest had his first little breakup.
Oh my goodness.
And he was out of school for a whole year because of COVID, and he went back and his little girlfriend and moved on to some other boy, and he was just all broken up about it. And I was proud at his resilience. I was proud at the way he approached it after a while.
How old is he?
He's only 8, so
okay. He's a little guy.
But this was like his diehard, do or die. And we've heard the other little boy. I know that's not how it had to turn out, without being judgmental of other people's children. I know that's not how it had to turn out. That there's a lot of kids that don't know how to process those things in a more positive manner. And so I felt like that was a win and an example of how this can work.
Yeah, definitely. And in parenting, you got to take all the wins.
Every single last one.
Every single one. And so what about you, Stan? Either what do you believe today about feelings and emotions, and perhaps some lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah. I think it goes without saying, and I think FD touched on, or actually hit it on the head, is that I think in terms of emotions, in terms of feelings, and being a Black man, it is necessary. And I think that a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, but for some of us, the closest we get to feelings is sex and fighting. That's what touch entails. And I think that I don't like necessarily using terms like getting in touch with your feminine side. I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think that really gets to the heart of it. I think that, there are always these dichotomies of the logical side, and men are logical and women are emotional. And I think that those are too dichotomous. Those are too linear. Those are too disparate. I think within all human beings, there is the penchant for logic and there's the penchant for emotion. And I think that really in terms of growth and in terms of evolving yourself as a person, you really do have to explore who you are in all of its totality. One of the things that Tai Chi has done for me, because I've done Tai Chi Chuan and I've done Taekwondo, so please forgive me for using the martial arts mediums here. But one of the things I've noticed is that much more so than many other martial disciplines, Tai Chi Chuan is recognized or viewed as the soft style. You see, it is a style that emphasizes touch. It is a style that emphasizes the ability to yield to oncoming force and not necessarily try to oppose it with a greater force. And so just in doing that discipline, looking at its martial principles, one is going to acquire a greater appreciation for softness, for relaxation, and the ability to feel. In fact, they teach you how to fight physically by teaching you how to be soft and how to feel. We don't even do the form in a military sense. We call it playing the form because you're more relaxed. There are more emotions involved. You're laughing, there's joy, but there's a certain seriousness to that. At least that's the way I was trained. So for me, one of the lessons is that there is strength in softness. There is strength in emotion and not keeping it inside, but allowing yourself to experience that and knowing that it doesn't take away from who you are. As I said earlier, the whole Marlboro man, this rugged outdoor individualist who doesn't cry, who, is always smoking, nothing gets to him. That person is headed for an early grave. You see, I think that there is something to be said. Now, this is not to say that sometimes I don't think reason should override what you feel, but I think there has to be some kind of relationship where you're allowed to experience both and the tensions that come from both. At least that's my view.
Good. I probably just have like 3 more questions, guys. And let's talk just a tiny bit more about resilience, and then we're going to move a little bit more into self-care. And I think both of you kind of in different parts of your answers talked a little bit about your personal self-care, but I want to speak explicitly on that in a couple of minutes. And we're going to start with you this time, Stan, and I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and you only need to answer just one. I want to give you the option of which approach you would like to take. So describe a time in your life in which you weren't as resilient as you wanted or needed to be, or a time in your life in which you felt truly resilient.
Probably now, but
Okay.
If when I think about that question, and maybe it's my bias, this whole yin yang thing, but I think for me, maybe to go back to something I said a little earlier, and this thought is not completely been fashioned, but just as a thought, as I think back over the experiences in my life, I've had failures, but I don't know if those were due to a lack of resiliency. So I guess you can have a failure and still be resilient. And so I wonder, when I think back over those experiences, some of the first things that come to mind is that those 2 ideas were probably there at the same time, or at least in the same space. And that I didn't feel a certain way, but just because I didn't feel strong, if I can say that about resilience, or I didn't feel forthright, maybe cerebrally I knew what the right thing to do was, and I may have went about it clumsily, but I tried to do the right thing. I think in that instance, maybe the 2 existed in the same space. I'll give you a quick example of something that you helped me with today. I had a little incident that embarrassed me at my instructor's house. And he had did something that was a little outside the cultural norms that we practice here in America. He didn't do anything intentionally bad. It's just that it was outside the norms and values that, were different. He's from China, so it's different. So I went to my wife and I said, hey, this is what happened. And I'll bring it up later. Now, I knew what I should have done in that moment, and I failed to do it, which was to go back in the house and have a conversation about what happened. And you said, instead of carrying that around with you, you should go back in there and you should talk to him about it. And I was trying to rationalize why I shouldn't do what I know I should do. And that's recent. That's a lack of resiliency. I said, nah, I don't want to do it. And all the while the words are coming out of my mouth, the weight of what I should do gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And I knew, I said, Jahi, get out the car and go talk to the man. You know, they're nice people, and you just be yourself. Just be nice about it. And so I did that. I said, she's right. I got out the car. I went back in. I said, Shifu. And I talked to him and his wife. And the experience was so euphoric. It was better than the training I had that day. Just to be able to go in and confront something that I didn't want to confront. And I did that anyway. And I think that there's not only a greater understanding, but I think there's a greater degree of respect that I have for them. And I think they may even have for me based upon our discussion. So I think that that's one of those instances. But in terms of, I didn't want to go back to an incident that occurred in 2005, because that would spoil the article in terms of an instance where I was resilient. I don't want to go through that. But I think that this incident, this episode today should definitely suffice.
No, I mean, I think that's just a great answer. But I think it also gets to the point whereas you can find resilience in big and small ways. It doesn't have to be this life-altering thing. Just like we talk about micro aggressions, all that stuff can build up. A lot of times in PD, we talk about it's a theory called like a crunch theory, and so it talks about addressing those things that get in the way of people having good relationships before a crunch really occurs. Because once that crunch occurs, it's a lot more difficult to loosen it up, like you said, to get back to relaxation. It's about those interpersonal relationships. And both of you guys spoke about it being uncomfortable. Well, sometimes we have to become comfortable with our discomfort, because both of you said it quite frankly, that's where you have growth. That's where you truly learn. And that's just in all different spheres of life. So what about you, FD, a time in which you felt truly resilient, or maybe you weren't as resilient as you truly wanted to be?
Yeah, so they both come around the same time. I have been blessed with a pretty strong will and a very even temper and minimal challenges to those two characteristics. A decent amount, my fair share maybe, but definitely compared to others in my circle and my family, I have avoided certain things through the grace of whomever you may believe in, whatever force you may believe in. And then in 2017, 2018, all that started to change. And I was hit with a barrage of personal, tragedies and challenges. I lost several loved ones. My mother developed a significant chronic illness. My wife developed a chronic illness. I had workplace challenges. It was all these things within basically like a 6 to 8 month period, 6 months, a year long period. And then suddenly, like, I found myself for the first time, like I'm even getting emotional now thinking about it. I found myself like frayed, not afraid, that too, but like literally feeling the extremities coming apart. And feeling like I was not able to function properly as a partner, as a father, as a worker, etc. Because it was overwhelming. And so then I got into therapy for the first time. And I, did what you're supposed to do to a therapist, which is completely unload. And then hopefully, depending on how your therapy style is, as you look at all these things you've finally unloaded, you kind of like rearrange them and shape them and put them in order in a way that works for you. And suddenly, that improved communication with my wife. That gave me the strength I needed to process the losses I had experienced, which then made it possible for me to focus at work, which then lowered my stress levels. It made me maybe more patient with my children. And then I came out of it feeling so much stronger than I went into it. And also being able to share that experience with other people who have had similar things, similar situations. So, I am, and then the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh, we ready. It's all right. I got my therapist already lined up. We meet every Saturday. And, I was, for the most part, okay, all things considered during the pandemic. But yes, it was definitely a space where I kind of dipped and then was able to come back up and felt stronger in that process.
Yeah.
That's deep.
I mean, it is, and it definitely gets us to the last part when I want to speak on self-care. But every time I pose the question, and trust me, it happens invariably. At least one of my guests, exactly what the two of you did. It started off with perhaps an event in their life, which is maybe a low point, but through their resilience, through their support from their allies and their communities and their loved ones, they were able to turn that into actually a really high resilience and something truly positive. Because sometimes when things happen, you might just be down for a while, right? And I think that's probably normal. But then the question is, how long are you going to stay down? And then how can you turn that around within engaging in things that are truly within your sphere of influence, your sphere of control? And seeking professional help is definitely something that we have control over. And I recommend that in the book. It's not meant to replace medical intervention. We should actively seek and do so. So I'm gonna let you go first, FD. So when you think about your own self-care, what does that look like as far as your practice? What do you do deliberately? Or maybe what are some things that you really see that you really should be doing and that you're gonna say, starting today, starting on Monday, I'm gonna pick up this practice?
So I am rearranging that in the recent months. One thing that COVID did is it definitely put some weight on me. And I had a relatively decent, exercise regimen. I wasn't in the healthiest, as healthy as I wanted to be, but I was at least maintaining, and changing that up really just kind of threw that out of whack. And then what's been a bigger challenge is becoming a content creator. I was already relatively sedentary just by nature because I'm a media junkie, I'm a gamer, and I've, for better or for worse, instilled that in my children. And so that was already a problem, but now I have, on top of work, long stints. Like my breaks now from work are now writing scripts, editing videos, engaging on social media a lot more, because that's a part of brand building. So,
Yep.
so I'm in a position where maybe I need your book, so I can, rearrange in this new paradigm, because I'm, God willing, knock on wood, going to be leaving my professional job to focus full time on content creation in the near future. And so, and we were never going back to the office. I already kind of knew that. So I have to figure out a way to weave in exercise, to weave in outdoors, to weave in, lessening my screen time, things like that. And still, living the life that a life that I can enjoy. Just before we started, we had a rowing machine delivered. So that's a good place to start. And I had to disconnect from my therapist because of just the change in scheduling. So I'm now, I'm in the process, thankfully, of reintroducing all the things that I know work. I'm just trying to fit them into the change that I'm going through, and hoping, that my health and my sanity will bear with me on the way there as I get things back in order. I think I have a visitor, so if anybody pops up in the background.
Oh, it's okay. And so you don't have to say hope. So what I do in the book when really talk about practices. So that basically I look at 7 different types of self-care. So like your professional, your personal, financial self-care, spiritual. So what I actually put people to simply do, and I provide a couple of forms for them, is I think I simply called it a week of self-care. And then you have Sunday through Saturday, and ask people to be really explicit about what are you going to do. Sometimes it really just begins there. And there's also a self-care checklist. So just again, you can get an idea of your current state of self-care in the different categories, and then maybe some things that you already are doing, and then the areas in which you have the most growth. So if I was going to give some of these books away to some of my guests. So shoot me your home address if you feel comfortable doing so. And these are mainly my author copies here, but it comes out in December. So I'll get a couple more author copies and I'll send this to you in the mail.
And I think it'll be cool. I am involved in a men's health group that I would like to share this with. I don't want to get free copies for them, but I will figure out a way to access those copies when it drops officially. You said in December?
It is. It's on. They're all on pre-order now.
Okay.
And basically most places, unfortunately, what you could think of: Amazon, Barnes and Nobles,
Right.
Books A Million, and Target. So I'm publishing these books wide, meaning it's just not on Amazon. It's at really all the major online booksellers. So yeah, if you want to share, that would be great. And it's the reason why I spent time, like literally a year, doing this.
Yeah.
So Jahi, I know you talked a lot about your martial arts, but that's not the only thing that you do. So when you think about your self-care practices, what are some stuff that you do? And then maybe some practices, now that you're really thinking about it, that you may want to adopt.
Oh, yeah. I love the response that brother gave. FD is right on point with it. It's going to sound a little disjointed, but please bear with me. But one of the self-care practices I developed some years ago is taking the long way home from work. Believe it or not, the job I was in, I did not like it. I wasn't very comfortable with the job, and it was a toxic environment. And just the whole idea of taking the long way home and just kind of, I like driving anyway, and just kind of relaxing, letting the music minister to you, or sometimes turning the music off and just driving through scenic routes where I love what I see, where it's not just, unfortunately, it's not a truly dilapidated area. It's not a lot of problems that you may see in some of those areas. You may go through an area that is green, that has a lot of green, a lot of life to it. I mean, it's just beautiful. And just seeing those aesthetic images, I think, has an effect on your mindset, on your mood. It may not totally reverse the mood, but there will be some relief, I think, that comes with it. I mean, every day, every night when I come in, I know some people pray before they go to bed, but I have this ritual that I created where I meditate. I will either sit down and take the time to meditate. and I just require quiet. That's it. And I just breathe and I relax. And I can't speak for anybody else, but it works. And other times I meditate while standing. It's a power exercise. But there are certain sensations and feelings that you don't know you're feeling when you just get to a quiet place and you can stand and relax. It's like, I didn't know that was there. It's very, very relaxing. And I'm always doing something. Sometimes it's just about if I have to take something or I have to deposit a check. I say, how far is the bank? Okay, I could drive, but I'm not. I'll walk. And walking has been a part of my life since I was a kid. I've always walked. I've always ran places. And so I didn't understand why I would get away from that. Every little bit helps. And walking is like, it's a way to satiate my curiosity. It is an exercise. It is a natural movement that we should all, a lot of people take it for granted because they can do it. But when you're in a position where you can't do it anymore, like for a time in 2005, when I couldn't do it for a while, you understand, bless you. You understand that that's something that it's a beautiful thing. And when FT talked about therapy, that is something that I am actively researching as we speak. I think for me, it is something that will be a beautiful addition to martial arts training, internal training, the chiropractor, going vegan as I've been for years off and on. That really, really helps. Fasting. I mean, this is another one of those questions you've asked that could go on and on and on in terms of self-care, because I'm in that zone now. I'm in that space. Asuf and Najah, my children, one has gone off to grad school and the other is an undergrad. So now it's my wife and I, we're in the house. And so it's almost like this seasonal change where you never stop being a parent, you never stop being dad, you never stop being pop, but it's still different. And I can feel it. I can, this is going to be too long. I'm not going to take up all the time. Just that when you're in that space, suffice it for a better term, things start happening. And you show your resolve by going through the cold season. And no matter what, you still keep moving. But sometimes there's also a drive that propels you. So, when self-care, I didn't know it until this conversation, but that's something I can talk about endlessly now that I think about
it. FD, you wanted to add?
Yeah, because I know we wrapping up, and the walls are closing in.
Sorry.
I wanted to point out, because this is something important that as part of my professional background, is I think as we've had a mental health breakthrough as in the Black community, we've undermined the value of non-formal self-care practices. I think I'm hoping that you probably get into this in the book, because like Stanley mentioned all those things that he did except for therapy, but all those are excellent self-care things. I miss my work commute. I haven't had a real work commute in years. And I know for some people, I don't want to disrespect the fact that you drive an hour to work, because I'm sure that's not
it's not fun.
I haven't had a work commute over 10 minutes in 5 years.
Wow.
And even in between then, I've only had long work commutes for a few months at a time. It's the glory be again to whomever you believe in. That said, therapy is hard to access for a lot of people. I work in health, and it's still hard for me to find a therapist that works for me. There's therapists that lack sometimes cultural competency for dealing with Black men. There's very few Black male therapists. So we can't denigrate exercise, music, meditation. All the things that Stanley just mentioned are valid and valuable things. What we don't want is self-medication,
right,
and things along those lines as self-care, because those do not provide care. And that's unfortunately where a lot of Black men reside in when it comes to addressing, processing negative events and emotions, is self-medication, acting out destructive behavior, etc. So, if you can access therapy, therapy can be great. If you cannot access therapy, or if therapy is not working, things like exercise, meditation, your favorite podcast, whatever, can be very useful.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to access wellness. The Color of My Resilience book is probably one of them. I can't wait to get my copy. But so I just don't want to. I want to make sure, because I've talked about therapy a lot, and I want to put out there that it's not a silver bullet, and it's not for everyone if you can't access it. So all those other things are still very valuable.
Yes. And the final question, guys, so we've been on here a while, and I always say it's open. I'm not going to let you say anything else right now. It's open to interpretation, and I'm going to let FC go first, and then Stan. So what is the color of your resilience?
It's green.
It's green. I love that shade of green.
It's so funny, and so I'm gonna make that work. Watch this.
Okay.
We bought this house 2010, and green is my favorite color since I was a kid. And my wife goes between being like a woman who is like, what's the girl from Scandal? I don't know.
Carrie Washington.
Goes from being Olivia Pope. To like, this is not working. The woman from Gone with the Wind, like a damsel in distress. She likes vacillating between those two spaces, where she's like, "Hey, this the plan, bro." And then it's like, "Baby, what you want to do? I don't know." Like, it's why we work together, because we both exchange those spaces. And so she's like, "What are we going to paint the kitchen?" I was like, "Let's paint the kitchen green." So the kitchen's been green since we bought the house. We bought this house. The first thing that happened is it got broke into. And it got broke into again like a week later. And then these folks kept coming to the house and taking every little video game, every little TV, all these things. And I was like, we didn't have kids yet. And I was like, look, we're gonna have to go. This is clearly not for us. And it was her resilience and her refusal to leave that said, no, I'm not gonna be put out my house by folks that are, that mean us harm. And we had a couple of other moments, but we've had a safe house since then. And now this green is my brand. And this green has been a vessel through which I have grown a business. And I am changing my life and my family's life via it. Because one of the main things I get, as you just said, Ms. Jones, is I love that color green. And the vibe it gets off as I talk my stuff on my videos, I think people appreciate. And, for a second, I was like, let's do blue, but no, like, so the color of my resilience is green because
beautiful.
This wall is emblematic of so many different journeys in this household and in my life. And that's what I'm holding at.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you. And then so, Stan, you have the last word with this, and then I'm just going to close it out and let you gentlemen continue with your Sunday. So what is the color of your resilience?
I am really grabbing at stars on this one because I have no idea. But what happened when you asked the question, I sat back and my eyes kind of settled outside, and it's beautiful. And I noticed that there is a tree that sits in front of our house that's green leaves, and the tree is brown, and the sky is blue. Blue is my favorite color. And when I'm outside, I draw energy from trees because of a practice that I engage in. So if I had to pick a color, it might be a combination of the three. Really trying to, blue is my favorite color, but in terms of where I'm always moving, it's green, it's brown, and it's the color I see when I look in the mirror. So green, brown, and blue.
Right. All right, beautiful. Wow, guys, we've been on here a while, and I want to thank you again. That's definitely a little longer than I typically go. Really rich conversation. I hope you feel the same way, that it was a valuable time. to spend on a Sunday. So I want to thank people for dropping in. And I've actually never said this. I'm super new and I'm recording everything, and then I'm going to start putting the content up. But if you like this content, and honestly, I can't see how you could not, after listening to these two thoughtful, reflective, amazing men, subscribe to the channel and like the video. So again, thank you, FD. Thank you, Stan. And for everyone else, stay tuned for our next Self-Care Saturday with ND.